and we are going to start. So why are we running this event today? We've brought together some key people who are working on protecting our biodiversity in the UK, London and Lambeth. Why is this so important to us all, and why to us specifically at Incredible Edible Lambeth? So IEL, if you don't know, is all about food, good food. It's about growing more food in Lambeth, but we can't do this if we don't look after our green spaces by encouraging biodiversity. We need pollinators, and we'll find out why they're so important from our first guest in a moment. IEL has been running a pesticide-free campaign for 18 months, pesticide-free Lambeth campaign for 18 months or so. And if you've not already done so, we'd encourage you to go to our website and pledge to go pesticide-free today. Our campaign went national recently as we were a case study in the new Wildlife Trust's Reversing the Decline of Insects report published last week, for which our first speaker, Professor Golson, was the lead author. So this event is timely. Our hope is that by the end of this session, we'll all feel better equipped to tackle this, what can only be described as a biodiversity crisis. And we're so grateful to everyone who's agreed to speak tonight. One of the amazing things about Zoom is that you can actually be quite brave and invite people you may not normally ask. And the amazing thing tonight was that everybody we asked said yes. And we're so delighted to bring together such gifted and knowledgeable people. So thank you so much for agreeing to speak. So our first speaker tonight is Dave Golson. He's a professor of biology from Sussex University, specialising in the ecology and conservation of insects. He's author of several fascinating books. Dave has spent a lifetime obsessing over insects. So in an impossibly short amount of time, Dave is going to provide us with an overview of the current situation in the world and in the UK. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Janie. Yeah, it's a lot to cover, so this is going to be quite hurried. You bear with me. So I'm going to try and talk about the biodiversity crisis, particularly focusing on insects and why they're important and what we can do about it in the remaining time I have. Bear with me, I'm just going to share my screen and show you some, hopefully show you some slides. Where's my, where's it gone? Sorry, just bear with me. I don't understand why I can't see what I was hoping to see at that point. Okay. That's a bit, okay. Sorry, the Zoom fools me every time by playing strange tricks. I'm hoping now you can a picture of a, I just wanted to put it onto slideshow. Oh, there we go. Oh, okay. Are we there? From the smiles, I think I finally got my slides showing. Sorry about that. Okay, let's move on. Before I talk about insects, let me talk about something bigger. Just to sort of set the scene, this is our planet, obviously. It's an amazing thing with maybe, you know, a rock hurtling through space with maybe 10 million species clinging to the surface. It gives us everything. It's our home, it's our source of food and air and beauty and wonder, and why on earth aren't we doing a better job of looking after it? The big picture is that we're making a real mess of our beautiful planet: climate change, soil erosion, pollution of umpteen different types, and so on and so on. I'm going to focus on biodiversity loss, which is my sort of speciality, but it interlinks with all of these things. Now, when you start talking about biodiversity, most people think of extinction of big mammals or big charismatic animals like tigers or polar bears or pandas or whatever. And it's only quite recently that we became really properly aware that it isn't just big animals like those that are disappearing. Actually, the small stuff is disappearing too, and if anything, perhaps faster. So in 2017, a study was published from Germany. I was kind of involved in it. And it showed this really dramatic decline in the abundance of flying insects. It's based on these funny malaise traps. That's a malaise trap, that kind of tent-like thing, top right. And German entomologists have been catching insects in these traps all over Germany since the late 1980s. And what this graph shows you is how the biomass of insects changed over 26 years from 1989 to 2016. And essentially it fell by 75%, suggesting that we're in the midst of a sort of catastrophic collapse of insect numbers. Now, we don't have similar data for the UK, but I could show you lots more similar charts for our butterflies, our moths, our wild bees, our hoverflies. All the insects that we have data for seem to be in decline. And that should really worry us, because insects are hugely important. Just briefly, they themselves make up 3/4 of all species that we know of on Earth. Sorry, 2/3 of all species that we know of on Earth. And they're food for an enormous number of other species, birds, bats, amphibians, lizards, freshwater fish, and so on, which would all starve. So if you're one of these beautiful bee eaters living in Germany, 3/4 of your food has disappeared in the last 26 years. And insects do a whole bunch of other vitally important things. They're pollinators, which we'll come to in a second. They're biocontrol agents. They recycle dung and dead bodies and dead trees and keep the soil healthy, and so on and so on. They're basically involved in everything that happens on land and in fresh water. So if insects are disappearing, that's going to have all sorts of consequences. The most obvious one for us being what will happen if we don't have enough pollinators. So 87% of all the plants in the world need pollinating by some kind of animal, and is usually an insect. Not always a bee, I should say. Sometimes it's a fly or a wasp or a beetle or a moth or a butterfly or whatever. But between them, they ensure that plants set seed, and they ensure that our crops produce fruits and vegetables. 3/4 of all the crops we grow in the world need pollinating by some kind of insect. So we've grown used to our supermarkets being full of lovely food, but if we didn't have the pollinators, it wouldn't look so good. We wouldn't have strawberries or raspberries or courgettes or cucumbers or tomatoes or chili peppers, or even things like coffee and chocolate. They all depend on pollination. So essentially, people would starve if we didn't have insects. And we should remember that, you know, we really need these little creatures. So what can we do? Well, it's a big, complicated subject, and I haven't really got time to do it justice. But the good news is we can all get involved in doing stuff. I'm going to whiz through it at breakneck speed, some suggestions to what we might do. You can find more detail in my book. Sorry to give a book plug in this short talk, but I've written a book about how we can invite insects into our gardens and our urban areas and make them more wildlife friendly, more insect friendly. There's 500,000 hectares of gardens in the UK. So just imagine if they're all full of bee friendly flowers and so on. That would really help. So what can we, if we have a garden, what can people do to make it a bit more insect friendly? You can reduce mowing of your lawn. Really simple thing to do. That's my lawn. I haven't planted any flowers. I just don't mow very much. And it's covered in flowers. So many of us could very easily turn some or all of our lawn into a wildflower meadow. And similarly, we could plant wildflowers all over road verges, all over roundabouts. Imagine if every road verge and every roundabout in Britain looked like that, rather than being regularly mown grass. Wouldn't that be cool? We can be more tolerant of weeds, where weeds at the end of the day are wildflowers. And if you could get rid of all the weeds in Lambeth by just renaming them wildflowers. Wouldn't that be a nice approach? Many of them are fantastic for insects, like the 3 shown there: dandelions, ragwort, thistles, often demonized as sort of terrible things that we have to do this kind of thing to. This makes me weep. You see this all over urban areas in Britain. This is a little bit of vegetation that's been blitzed with herbicide, glyphosate probably. One of the simplest things we could do to make our urban areas more wildlife friendly is to get rid of these horrible pesticides. You just don't need them. We don't need them at all in our gardens, in our parks, and so What we do need is lots of bee-friendly flowers, and I haven't got time to tell you all about the different ones you might grow, but there's loads of information out there, including YouTube videos that I've made about the best bee-friendly flowers to grow in your garden. Include some native wildflowers. There are loads to choose from. I've just highlight one of these 8 I've shown up here. Top left is Viper's bugloss. It's in flower at the moment in my garden. It's really beautiful. It's a native wildflower. Bees go mad for it, and it's dead easy to grow. We could also squeeze more flowering trees into our gardens and parks and city streets and so on. Flowering trees can feed hundreds or thousands of bees at a time. Things like lime trees or horse chestnuts. Bit too big for most people's gardens, but most of us got room for an apple on a dwarfing rootstock. You can even have those on a patio. They also, of course, lock up carbon and help keep the air clean and so on. I'd love to see flowering trees down all of our streets. So, sorry, jumping about here. That's a very, very lightning run through what we might do in urban areas. The bigger picture, though, is that we also need to think about how we grow our food. And 70% of Britain is farmland. So even if we made all our urban areas great for wildlife, we might still not find that really turns around the problems with insects, because the majority of the landscape is intensively farmed. It's sprayed with pesticides over and over again. It's these huge monocultures, big fields. It's bleak and inhospitable to insect life. And it doesn't have to be like that. I think there's lots of evidence that it's perfectly possible to grow lots more food in a way that works with nature and supports biodiversity rather than trying to wipe it out. I haven't got time to go into that, but I think the picture says it all. I'd love to see many more fruit and vegetable growing operations, small farms close to cities, in Lambeth itself, providing all the fruit and veg that we need to keep us healthy, rather than giant fields of wheat and oilseed rape drenched in pesticides. Okay, that was a very quick overview. Basically, we need to look after this amazing planet of ours and ensure that our children have a decent place to live, because on current trajectory, that sadly is not going to be the case. Thank you very much for listening.
Dave, thank you so much. I know that was a bit of a big ask to get you to do that in such a short time, but I think you did it, which is a miracle. And
do my best.
Yeah,
you had 30 seconds left.
Oh, I'm impressed. So lots to think about, and we'll come back to that later. Our next speaker is Judy Linguang. Judy is a woman after my own heart. She's a dynamo, an artist turned activist. She's worked tirelessly on environmental issues. She established the Black Environment Network back in the 80s. Since then, she's been vice chair of UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere Urban Forum, chair of Sowing the Seeds, an organisation helping London's children access nature, sat on several nature conservation boards, and has been heavily involved in establishing London as the world's first national park city. So, Judy, why does biodiversity matter to us in London, and what is London National Park City doing about it?
Thank you very much for the introduction. And it's lovely to see you all with us this evening. What I'm going to talk about is so basic, you know. It is about hearts and minds. We need to really realize something very simple. Everything we depend on to be alive is alive. Everything that we eat is connected, and that aliveness is dependent on that big word we call biodiversity, which means that everything is connected, and we depend on millions of things that are diverse in order to fulfill all their original functions. Somehow the illusion that we can knock things out and still go on and keep knocking things out is just not viable. And the importance, living in an urban area, the importance of food growing has become paramount to the movement of environment and nature. Because, you know, at Habitat 3, the Secretary General actually said that the future of sustainable development is a battle that will be fought, won or lost in our cities. Why is that? In the UK, we have 80% of our population living here. And guess what? We're losing our connections with wild nature. There are children who've never seen anything wild, but the closest that we've got to getting them really connected and easily connected is food growing in schools, in our parks and gardens, in our allotments and so on. In food growing, I keep telling the nature conservation people who think wild plants are the first-class citizens, garden plants are second-class, and of course food, the third-class citizens. But you know, whatever we do to these plants, selectively selecting characteristics and things, I can tell you this, if they're still alive, it's because all the wild processes are still going on. You can teach everything you want to know about nature from a cabbage. And when we teach things about vegetables and so on, we realize those fundamentals. We need our pollinators. The cabbage white is there trying to eat the thing that you want to grow. We know about living soil and how by living soil, it actually protects you by giving you the healthy vegetables that you want to grow. And we know about all these things as if we are like looking at things like bees and pollinators, like what people used to do in the mines. They're the canary in the mine, shouting really loud when you are actually going to die if you don't keep doing this. That we don't protect those small things, we are going to die. And I think that this sort of finger on the pulse position of food growing is really important to us in the urban areas. That when we see small things disappearing, what a danger signal that is. And of course, these small things are big things when it comes to growing food. You know, things that we don't think about. Sometimes we talk about big subjects saying we're threatened by climate change and so on. The very simple principle of temperature change, a lot of people don't realize this going on about 1.5 degrees. That when you get to 2 and 3, nature is so sensitive that with food crops, when you get to 2 and 3 degrees, the temperature change means that, guess what? Our plants are going to start struggling to produce seed. And where does our major food come from? Grain. Our wheat, our barley, our oats, and so on. When you get to 2 and 3 degrees, we're going to start losing something like 1/3 of the harvest. The crops refuse to seed. So these things are really, really big. And to connect with nature and connect to these big principles and the things like pollinators and so on are vital in the city for us to understand the finger on the pulse attitude about pesticides and so on. You know, pesticides in the countryside has resulted in our losing our birds. And in the cities, we're feeding them grain, we're feeding them seed, and yet the baby birds and so on are losing being able to eat insects, which they need so very much when they're just young and babies. And a lot of the loss of birds in our cities, I'm sure, are actually related to the loss of insects in that vital thing we call our food chain. And these things strike at our heart. You know, we love our birds, we love our butterflies, and we love our food. And these things are so fundamental to building the next generation that will shout about nature, to tell the government we want these things put right. And in London National Park City, a lot of it is about that connection to nature. We start at the bottom rung of people. If you look at the website, there's lots of things like things you should enjoy about nature, things you can do, things you can make a difference with. And all of the people I'm speaking to tonight, you know, if you want to have an idea that needs to be spread, go to the London National Park City, the Make a Difference section of it, tell your story about how you want others to make a difference and how you feel passionately about it. Use the website. We also have at the moment the 100 Voices project, and you can be one of the 100 voices that talks about what aspect makes London National Park City work and write about it, be a voice. There are also now rangers across all the boroughs. I think there are 3 or 4 of them in Lambeth. And the rangers are your local people doing projects of their own to involve local people. And we need to grow this. We need more rangers. And we need rangers for you to contact and tell them, please include pollinators and so on in your portfolio of what you want to do. So lots of things like that are really important. And of course, London National Park City is linked to the mayor. The mayor has been putting money in over the last couple of years. They put in something like 12 million for the Greener London Fund, which is actually directed at ordinary people doing green things. So these things need to continue. The festival in summer is probably not going to take place for real this year, face to face, but my goodness, we can do things on Zoom, can't we? And really share with people, let people see what we're doing and so on. So all those connections at a very local level, at the level of communicating with hearts and minds, having a passion, because passion is the driver for action. We must never forget that. To have the beauty of nature is so important. And how beautiful are vegetables, you know? You can eat them, but my goodness, the form is beautiful and so on, and they take place in our life. So I think, you know, we really need to use vegetables, connect to all those other levels of participation through our gardens. London's got 3.8 million gardens. And if people in their gardens start doing wild things, giving over even a meter each, a square meter each to wildness, you get 3.8 million square meters of wildness. And I also remember very long ago now, in the beginning of Ben, I remember when London Wildlife Trust ran a project called Wild in Your Window Box. And they got young people to plant wild insect attractive plants in window boxes, giving them to the older generation who love window boxes. And Camden actually went around creating all these angle irons that they had to safely have window boxes on people's window sills and so on. And I could remember one of the council estates, 1,000 window boxes, a vertical paradise for insects. All these imaginative things can be things that we think about how to make a difference, work with the engine that is the London National Park City website and its people, because that engine of the website is only as strong as who looks at it, who posts on it, who makes use of it. So to all of you networkers, use that, raise issues, enthuse others, do things together. So I wish you all a very good evening, and to listen to the rest of our speakers on this interesting subject that is so crucial to all of us.
Thank you so much, Judy. Absolutely brilliant, very inspiring, and all of us can, I really want to have another look at the website now and see how I can get involved. Brilliant. Our next speaker is Nick Mole, and he is Policy Officer for the Pesticide Action Network UK. This is a national organisation highlighting the issues surrounding pesticide. Really interesting website where they're raising issues like pesticide residue on our food, the possible post-Brexit trade deals that might happen, which will impact all of us and our exposure to pesticide. So Nick's been incredibly helpful to us as an organisation, helping us with our campaign. And I can't see, oh, there you are, Nick, great. Over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. What a pleasure to be on a panel with such a distinguished selection of charismatic megafauna. So it's not all just about the insects. It's great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, which is the sort of pesticide-free campaign, pesticide-free towns campaign, but how that fits into the bigger picture, and how actually the small things, kind of things that Dave alluded to and Judy alluded to, can actually make much larger changes on the national and potentially global scale. So since about 2015, we've been running a pesticide-free towns campaign, with the idea being that pesticides are used everywhere, vast majority are used in agriculture, about 5% are used in non-agricultural settings, so in towns and cities, streets, parks, pavements, playgrounds, and in people's gardens. Within agriculture, there is, I mean, there's a huge debate, but there is sort of you can see why pesticides are used. However, within our towns and cities, the places where we work, live and play, there is absolutely no reason and no justification for using pesticides whatsoever. No economic value. We're not growing commercially food in our towns and cities as they are with agriculture. We're exposing our young children, we're exposing urban biodiversity, etc., to these unnecessary chemicals. So we started a campaign. We started in the back garden of the office where we're based in Brighton. And at the time, it was just me doing it. And the idea that I could go around and help every town and city in the UK to become pesticide free whilst nice was a little bit daunting. So we prepared a range of materials, information that's all freely available to everybody. And we've encouraged local people, residents, real people who actually live in these places to start their own campaigns, to start telling their decision makers that no, they want to do things differently. We've currently got, I think, about 130 campaigns of different sizes up and throughout the UK and Guernsey. Hello, Guernsey, by the way. And it's been effective. So people have done petitions. They've been out talking to their councillors, etc. They've been out hand weeding. They've been running campaigns and meetings like this, and all the little projects. And it ranges from their small local park to the borough-wide thing. And what I've seen in the last 5 years as it's developed, fewer people coming to us and more councils now coming directly to us because they're seeing what other councils are starting to do. And so far, we've got about 80 councils across the UK in some stage, either looking at alternatives or committing to phase things out or banning the use of herbicides, pesticides in their parks and green spaces. And it's really starting to snowball. And when we get councils coming directly to us, we know that the on-the-ground grassroots campaigning has been effective. And it continues to be. So we continue to encourage both. And yeah, as I say, you can come and find out everything you need to know from our website, or talk to me or drop me an email. But this fits into the bigger picture. So part of the reason we did it was not just because it was the right thing to do, because we don't need pesticides in our towns. We've also worked on agriculture for over 30 years, trying to reduce and change the way we farm and grow our food, because we know we've lost 50% of our farmland bird species since the 1970s. Dave's talked about the insects, the butterflies, etc. We've got pesticides in our water, pesticides in our soil. They're everywhere. However, it's very difficult to work in agriculture. We're up against some powerful forces, the National Farmers Union, the agrochemical industry, which is a multi-billion-pound global industry that has the ear of decision makers. So what we thought was this could also feed into that. So if we start getting a groundswell, we start raising awareness with the public about what pesticides are, start getting it banned in towns and cities, they're just going to start thinking, well, hold on a minute. If we don't want it in our parks, we shouldn't be growing our food with it. And so we hope that that's a driver to change. And we have a few things coming on the horizon. We've got a new agriculture bill. The Lords have been debating it, and I've never heard of so many mentions of the word pesticides, agroecology, organic, the need to reduce, the need to deal with this biodiversity crisis. And it's all about raising awareness. So all these small things that you do, so if you go and you plant flowers, or if you lobby your local councillor, or if you go and hand weed, if you want to weed, and one of our recommendations is just to leave things be. That's my favourite way of getting rid of pesticides, but some places you might have to get rid of it, do it by hand. All these little things are all adding up into the bigger picture, and that's what we're hoping for. We're really hoping that we can change the way we do things, because if we don't, we're going to lose everything, as Dave so rightly pointed out. So it's great. Everyone can be a part of it. Everybody with the pesticide-free towns can be a part of it. We can make positive change immediately where we live. We can make wider changes to the world that we live in. And I think I'll cut it out there because we've heard a lot more. But do check out the PAN UK website for more information. As I say, we're always happy to help, advise, assist, come along. And also, never think that what you're doing or anything that you do is too small. It all adds up, and all these little bits we can chip away at what we've got and make things better, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Good to hear the history of how it's all evolved, and I'm really encouraged that councils are coming to you now because you're right, that means that we're doing our job and putting the pressure on and asking them to look at alternatives. There's a whole story going on right now with us and Lambeth Council. I'm sure that quite a few people attending this event today are quite cross about a certain thing that's happened, but we might get to that later, and just think about the best ways to approach councils that are dragging their feet a little bit. So over to Sophie, who I don't know Sophie, but I absolutely love what she's doing. She has a campaign called More Than Weeds, and it's a truly inspiring thing where she, the first time I saw her was when she got into The Guardian, I think, where she was drawing on the pavement and identifying wildflowers for people walking down the street. So Sophie, I'd love you to take over here and tell us a bit about what you're doing.
Thank you very much. I've got a few slides, so I'm going to try and share my screen and keep to 5 minutes, if that's all right.
Great, thank you.
You have 10.
I've got 10. Oh, wow. No, it's not going to take as long. I just want to show you a couple of, plant pictures, obviously. As you've heard, I've launched this campaign called More Than Weeds. You can see my background as well with this question called, are we weeds? And really, that's what I'm trying. That's what I'm trying, to make people think about. We talk a lot about urban plants, and Judy quite rightly said, we've got this separation between garden plants, trees, edible plants, and isn't it time, to stop thinking about plants as things we put in boxes, and think about plants as things which live around us and which can all have roles in our lives, really. So my question is, can we potentially rewire our streets or make our streets slightly greener? So I'm going to start with a couple of pictures. As you've probably noticed, in newspapers, radio, TV, there's been loads of pictures of plants that have been growing as a result of the lockdown. So wherever you are around the world, councils have stopped spraying. There's been, less footfall on the pavements, and so plants have been able to grow. So this was a tweet on the left. You see a tweet, someone who's posted, beautiful flowers growing along a wall on their local pavements. And on the right it's a picture of a plaza in Rome. So really, it's been the case around the world. And some people have actually, discovered, I've had emails, people saying to me, I had no idea that actually, there could be green on our streets. And it looks so lovely. I've been, watching that plant grow, that flower, open. So I think it's developed a slightly different relationship with nature, especially from urban citizens who, might not be used to that. However, and this is something, that Nick is very aware of, but working with, with council, it's complaints. So in many cases, when you start spraying or when you try to reduce pesticides, you'll have complaints of people and local residents who are not used to that and who like, their pavements, their road verges to be really tidy, neat and tidy. So this is a website called Fix My Street, which some of you may know, where you can report if you have, litter or problems with your pavements, or I don't know, a tree that has fallen, something like that. And actually people are reporting things which, to some of us look completely normal. For example, grass that is slightly too long, or plants that are growing around, lampposts which haven't been sprayed. So this is, as environmental professional, as in, biology and botany enthusiast, this is what we are up against. So, when Dave Golson was talking about the small things we can do, this is what we are up against. There are people who, like having pavements which are completely grey, having a lawn that is as short as possible. So we really have to work hard to change that mindset and explain to people why it is important to change. As Judy said, it's not only about the 1.5%, it's also about creating a healthy ecosystem, including in cities. So a question I often get asked, when I talk about the project is, actually, do those urban plants have a role? And I mean, those pictures were taken in Lambeth, in my local streets. And those plants have got so many different roles. I mean, they've quoted a few of them. There's obviously the food for insects and birds too. Some of those plants can actually reduce pollution because they can absorb some of the pollutants with their leaves. When they're planted in tree pits, they can help, they can reduce the moisture loss from the soil, and they can actually help some trees, survive drought and hot summers. They can be really pretty, and just that mental health kind of effect when people walk in the street and see a pretty flower is not something that should be ignored. And some are also edible and medicinal. So even though you might not want to, eat a plant that you'll find on the pavement, it's encouraging people, to learn about them, to discover what they are. So there are plenty of uses and roles for those plants. So the question really is, can we learn to live with them? And this is something that has really started in other countries. It is starting in the UK, as Nick said, with pesticide reducing campaigns, greening initiatives, things like that. And so these are a couple of pictures, from cities in France, for example, where they've actually, been letting plants grow on the pavement. Glyphosate was banned in all public spaces in 2017. And so the councils have had to learn to live with, a different kind of a new normal, if you want. And actually some councils in France have taken the reverse approach and decided to embrace their flora. So this is adverts, billboards that were in the city of Lyon, where they actually, tried to show to people that it was completely normal to see plants on their streets, that it was nothing, it was not neglect. That's the important thing. It's not about neglect, but it's deliberately, letting some plants live because they have a role, for biodiversity in our cities. And this was quite a successful campaign, and it greatly reduced the number of complaints because people understood, what was happening. It was something coming, from the city itself. So the idea, as I said, is not about neglect, but it's from moving from we just spray everything to weeding selectively. So if you've got a really narrow pavement, you might not be able to let plants. But if you have quite a wide pavement and it's small pretty plants, then there's really no problem with letting them live, and it's got to benefit people and wildlife as well. So as a result of my involvement in France, when I moved back to the UK, I decided to create this project called More Than Weeds. And the idea is really, to change how people view those plants. So I had a whole program of walks organized, weed walks, as I call them, organized. And this is going to come in the next few months. But I've been really, really surprised at the response. I've been talking to counsellors, journalists, researchers around the UK. So I think that there's really, a desire to change things. But the question is, can we teach people how to tolerate plants a little more? And could we even, garden with them? That's the idea. It's changing this perception that this is a weed because it's a plant. It might be a weed in someone's garden and, a plant that has many roles in the tree pit, for example. So if you're interested, you can follow the website, and you can follow me on Twitter as well. Thank you very much.
Sophie, thank you. Love that. Really made me smile. And it is all about perception, isn't it? Just getting people to recognise that it's actually okay to have these things on our streets, and in fact, it's massively beneficial. So I love that, and I am following you already, but I shall look forward to hearing more about your weed walks. Are you going to do any in Lambeth?
Yeah, it's the plan. I'm working out dates at the moment. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to do large walks with a lot of people. I was sort of thinking. I know the South London Botanical Institute has started doing walks again with 5 or 6 people, which is fine. So I'm going to.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, that's my dog barking. Brilliant. Very good. Well, let's link up with that one. I'd like that. So our final speaker tonight is Ian Bolton, and he works with Lambeth Council. He was the key author of the very extensive biodiversity action plan for Lambeth. And Ian is going to tell us why Lambeth Council is concerned about diversity and what it can do to engage with us, the residents of Lambeth, to help avert a crisis in the health and future of our borough's wildlife. Over to you.
Before Ian says anything, could we ask if there's anybody who wants to ask any of the speakers any questions, to do that on the chat page, please? We haven't got many questions so far, so it'd be good to have questions for any of the speakers tonight.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right, everybody?
Yeah.
Jolly good. All right, I'm going to try and share my screen as well. If it goes flying through the floor, then bear with me. So only just a couple of slides. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. And give me a second. Right. Hopefully, full screen mode. Can you see that, everybody? Yep. Okay, but yep. Right. Yep. So basically, we'll just give you a bit of an overview about biodiversity in Lambeth, about our present status, but also the challenges. So is Lambeth a good place for wildlife? And the answer is, it is. We've got plenty of wild plants, animals and habitats in the usual, but sometimes unusual places. And the reason we know this is because we do surveys. The council does surveys, residents do them, our NGOs, things like London Wildlife Trust and various ecologists. So we've got many different habitats and species. You've got community gardens, but you also have individual species in parks and green spaces. We've got many common habitats and the species that are typical of our locality, which is an inner London borough. So there's a blackbird, which you've probably all seen. But we've also got some very rare and endangered species, some that are restricted and declining. And on the right there is a white-tailed queen bumblebee. As you know, bumblebee numbers, as Dave will confirm, the populations have crashed in many parts of the UK and are continuing to give enormous concern. We get them in the borough. We're lucky that we have a relationship with a record centre called Giggle, not the joke, Giggle. Is a large records database, and they can give us the information which we can share and which we can exchange. So we get a lot of background data from a wide range of organisations to understand what we have and what we don't have. So we're quite lucky in Lambeth. If you look at what we've got, for London Borough as we are, with 330,000 people, we've got quite a bit. We've got plenty of open spaces. A large part of the borough is open space, 20%, which is not bad for inner London. We've got 45 wildlife sites called sinks, Brockwell Park, Streatham Common, the River Thames. You know, we're quite fortunate. We've got a local nature reserve, which is Streatham Common Local Nature Reserve. We've got 20.79 hectares of sink, which makes up about 11% of the borough. Considering how populated this borough is, that's pretty impressive. Many other inner London or inner city boroughs struggle to get that number. And we've currently knocking on for 19,000 species records for Lambeth, and which is an astonishing number to have. And from that, we know we've got 8 of 9 of London's priority habitats, the habitats that London is deemed as being important to protect and extend. So for our size, we're actually punching well above our weight. But we have got a lot of issues. There are problems, and I'm sure you're very conscious of them, which are affecting our wildlife. We've got population growth. We're having to find more and more space for more housing. The pressure is on. The demand for infrastructure, you know, widening the railway lines, widening the roads, trying to squeeze in more to meet that population demand is never going to stop. And of course, brownfield sites, sites which one time were just left alone, old industrial sites, are now being snapped up for redevelopment. So the places where nature got a breathing space are now being snapped up for housing. And will the actual new features in the housing site be better than what was there before? There's been a big debate about industrial sites being really good for many pollinator species. Some modern housing estates may not be the best place for them. And also the other factors, what about climate change? I mean, on the right-hand side there, that's the famous floods of Herne Hill, when the water shed off Brockwell Park and hit Herne Hill Junction. We're going to get more flash flooding in the borough. It's going to get worse. We have got pollution, air, water and land pollution. Mechanisation, everything's now about machinery doing things, you know, cutting the grass and cutting trees. We're not using human intuition and knowledge anymore. And of course, tree stock. Those of you who've got open spaces, you will know that our tree stock is getting old. It's getting more prone to disease like Aught processionary moth and Masari, which is a disease that affects plane trees. And development as well. Developers sometimes don't like trees. They get in the way of their developments, and there's a pressure to then move the tree, i.e. remove it, or to plant trees that don't compensate for the loss of the big trees. And we don't replace as well. We try and skirt around it. So one of the things we are looking to do from the Biodiversity Action Plan is to try and get together some people who are keen to try and make things better or move forward for the challenges we've got. That means delivering our Biodiversity Action Plan, which is a series of actions, not unachievable. We just need some people and some organisations to help us. We need to identify some sites and projects where we can do some intervention, where we can actually do some change and improve the protection. Opportunities for change in management. So the pictures there show Brockwell Park, and that's the Lido slope near the Lido, which is now wildflowers. On the right is an old rubbishy redgrass pitch, which was not being used, and we converted it into wildflower meadow. So we can change the way we manage some of our sites. And finally, I think the most important thing is we are trying to share good practice. You have probably got lots of knowledge and experience. You have experience in the sites that you look after. Can we then exchange that good practice and how the council manages sites? Also, when we talk to other partners, other agencies on land, can we share some of that practice? So I'm quite keen for people who would like to help me with a biodiversity partnership panel, just to get that set up and set up some initial meetings to say, what can we do together? What are our big challenges and issues? Pesticide have been mentioned. And again, that's something I'd like the panel to look at, just about how changes in management practice could actually reduce the amount of pesticides, not in parks, because we don't use many pesticides now, it's actually in the public realm, which is the big challenge. Thank you very much. Well, I think I've stopped sharing.
Still got another 4 minutes, Ian, if you wanted to carry on.
What I will mention, if you've got 4 minutes, how kind of me. I think it's about the issues we mentioned earlier about pesticides. In Lambeth parks, we've introduced what's called integrated weed management policy, which is working for our service, Lambeth Landscapes. So it's just within the parks and green space. It's a policy that sets out the processes we go through to decide if we're going to control weeds and other pests, the stages we follow. So the first one is tolerance. Can you tolerate it? Can you just leave it to do what it's doing? And Sophie and everybody else has mentioned this. But then intervene with manual, mechanical, biological, chemical methods. There are things you can obtain which are biochemicals which break down, and then persistent chemicals are the last resort. And it's a kind of cascade system you go through to decide when do you then apply the use of chemicals. Recently, our records, and we get FOIs about pesticide use in parks, our amount of pesticide use in parks has dropped year on year on year. And actually, now we only use a chemical, for instance, to control some of the nasties like Japanese knotweed and giant hogweed. Nowadays, it's mechanical and it's manual and tolerance. That's the way we've reduced the pesticide use. And I think, you know, practice makes perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So lots of questions popping up now, which is absolutely brilliant. I'm just going to tell you what has happened and this week with Lambeth Council, which is, I don't want Ian to have to field this anger from many people, because it's really not his responsibility. He's doing the best job he can possibly do. But essentially, we've been working with the council and with Nick as well to encourage the phasing out of glyphosate, and it was meant to start this October, but they announced this week that they're not going to start phasing it out until next year. And of course, we were pretty cross about that. They're using COVID as what I would consider an excuse, saying that the contracts aren't ready, they haven't checked the alternatives sufficiently. But we know that they have been testing the alternatives for quite a long time. And I mean, Nick would probably know better than us, but we feel that this is not acceptable for them to be pushing it another 6 months down the line. And I think a few people are asking, what should we do about this? Well, sign our pledge, write to your councillor, write to Lambeth, opt out of having your street sprayed. There is a facility where you can opt out. We're asking them to be much more public and transparent about their spraying, and even suggest, okay, if streets want their streets sprayed, they can opt in. This is a different way of considering it. And if you put it back to people saying, do you want to opt in? Maybe that's another way of doing it. Also, I think many of the estates are still sprayed, and a lot of people don't know that. Sorry, I'm talking too much, but could Tori or Marge raise any of the questions?
There's another question here, Janie, about what do the speakers think about council planted and maintained spaces? Could they change their maintenance practices? Could they ever learn more about recent planting research? This, as a landscape architect working on large residential estates, I'm often hobbled by the council's maintenance team's low skills.
So who would like to, Nick, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah.
Just want to get something off my chest, which is something that, again, this is about changing the mindsets. And you see it all over the country. And it's annual bedding plants. Get rid of them. Get rid of them. They're pointless. They cost a fortune. Plant native wild species in these formal beds. They can look absolutely beautiful. And you haven't got to go out and buy a shed load of bedding plants every spring to put in. That would be my number one take for and if Britain in Bloom and similar could get behind something like that, I think we could make a huge difference very, very quickly.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Sophie, go. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add. I mean, it makes perfect sense in terms of climate change as well, and not having to remove the cover of the soil every summer and spring and autumn, whatever. It makes complete sense, and it reduces the need to weed as well. So yeah, certainly.
I was very shocked by something that Dave said in another talk that he gave about these pollinator-friendly plants that are sold in nurseries. Do you want to say something about that, Dave?
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially most commercially reared plants are drenched in pesticides in the production process. A lot of them are imported from the Netherlands, where they have these enormous greenhouses. Anyway, we suspected as much, and we tested a bunch of plants being sold by garden centres, big names, Y Vale, Homebase, B&Q, being sold as bee friendly. You often see a bee logo on the plants that are attractive to bees and other pollinators, and we screened them for pesticides, and sure enough, nearly every single one had pesticides in it, and 75% actually had insecticides. 70% had neonicotinoid insecticides, which are kind of notorious for being super poisonous to bees. So they're being sold as bee friendly when they're full of bee poison. Brilliant. So basically, find an organic nursery if you want to buy plants, or grow from seed, or plant swap, or just leave native vegetation to spring up and don't bother to kill it, and you'll be pesticide free.
Thank you. I think that's a really important one that most of us don't know when we're going to the garden centres. So I think Mac, who is one of the directors of IEL, was going to raise one of the questions in the chat.
Hello, yes, there's a question from Kathy Bauer. What are the most effective things to do in urban gardens to encourage biodiversity, assuming not everything works everywhere all the time? So I think any one of our speakers could answer that. I'd probably start with Nick on that one. What is the single most effective things we can do to encourage biodiversity in our gardens? in the urban realm?
Yeah, I don't think that's me.
Okay, Dave.
I know what we can do to stop killing them, but I don't know about encouraging them necessarily.
All right, Dave, go ahead.
So I could, obviously I could mention my book again, but that would be rather selfish. I could direct you to, so the Wildlife Trusts recently launched, just last week, a document reversing insect declines. And if you go to their website, you can download a guide to individual things you can do in your garden to make them more insect friendly, and also a community action guide full of ideas for groups of people as to what they can do. So rather than my trying to kind of remember it all now, I direct people to those documents. They're absolutely packed full of also great examples of what people have already done, including, of course, Lambeth. Incredible Edible is one of the features of these kind of examples that we found when producing this report of really nice, inspiring projects already underway that people could copy. You know, if every borough in London copied Lambeth in trying to go pesticide free and having more flowers and so on, then wouldn't that be great? You know, so we need to learn from each other, and there's lots of potential.
Thank you.
So, team, was there any other questions that would be good to raise?
There's one. Sorry, there's one from someone, Sue's iPhone. Can rain gardens, suds planted with native and wildflowers be retrofitted to the estates to prevent storm flash runoff, causing emergency storm discharge from CSOs in the Thames? I don't know if anyone is a particular suds expert on our panel.
Well, I can contribute in the sense that we work very closely with the flood prevention team in the Lambeth Council. SUDS schemes have been introduced to a number of streets and highways in Lambeth. Those of you who live in the borough will have seen examples. It's very difficult to try and intercept the combined sewer outlets into the Thames once they get to the Thames. It's trying to stop the fluids and the liquids and the silts getting into the drains themselves, because once they're in the drainage system, they're in. And Thames Water can get rather narked about you trying to dig them out and whatever. So it's about finding ways of intercepting runoff before it reaches the drainage system and then overloads the combined sewers. And we've been very successful in having a number of such schemes introduced across the borough. It's not always easy because you've got to balance about traffic and about public access. But some of the schemes coming through now in the new phase are actually quite exciting and actually using a lot of native species, including grasses, native grasses and native plants. Going back to the thing about pesticides, you don't need to use chemicals to maintain them.
Could I come in on that about rain gardens? I think one of the most successful projects has been in Grangetown in Wales. There's a project that won the awards and so on. And the remarkable thing about that project was that it took the opportunity, because there was so much digging up and everything about actually laying a pipeline that they were doing. They decided to take advantage as they were doing that to transform the entire street landscape. And they designed it with rain gardens and put in lots of trees and green areas and so on as they were doing it. And the most remarkable thing about how they did it was that they spent 2 years consulting the community. It's unheard of. And they actually did things like people choosing. They gave people a list of plants, showed them photographs and so on, and they chose the colors and the plants of the rain gardens, so that they had a real investment in how that landscape actually shaped up. So, and it also shows how a very ordinary residential area with streets and so on was completely transformed, and they put in the first bicycle street in Wales, they call it, and so on. So it's a real example of good practice in an urban area of what you can do to really improve the surroundings. And of course, the other thing that I find so sort of amusing in a way is that when I show people photographs of the areas and say, oh my God, this is a middle class area. And I say to them, this is one of the most deprived areas in the whole of the UK. And somehow we need to somehow get rid of that image that a beautiful area is a middle class area. Every area, no matter how deprived, can look beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Judy. That's a really important point. I don't know why we think that only the she streets look nice. I mean, they all can, as you say. So many things being put in chat, which are really useful, and lots of takeaways. We haven't touched on the mowing regime and how we would really love the grounds maintenance to do a lot less of that. Dave has raised that in his talk, and that gorgeous meadow of his. Were you going to say something then, Marge, about?
Just to everybody that wants to be part of Ian Bolton's biodiversity, what was the title of it, Ian?
It's just called it's a working group or a biodiversity partnership panel. I haven't come up with a name yet, really.
Okay, if anybody wants to be part of that, put their emails down and let us know who wants to be part of this.
Yeah.
Ian actually has kindly given his email address in the chat feed as well, so you can contact him directly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Nick?
Yeah, just wanted to raise something that I should have mentioned when I was talking earlier, and it's about the sort of the political level. And again, this is something that we need people to help with. In July, almost a year ago, the GLA passed a motion unanimously, cross-party, calling on the mayor to develop a 3-year phase-out plan for Greater London for pesticide use, and to establish a working group, that's not quite the word I'm looking for, that would draw in members of each London borough and other key land managers, including Transport for London, etc., so they could work out how to stop the use and phase out the use of herbicides, glyphosate in particular, across London. So far, the mayor hasn't actually responded to that motion call, and we would like him to. Maybe this is something that National Park City could help persuade the mayor to do, but it's certainly something that, coming up to next May's election, we would like to hold him to and point out that the Great London Assembly wants this, he should support it, and let's get it done.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So how do we do that? How do we?
Well, I would like to have a chat with Judy at some point offline, but other than that, there will be, we'll be, contact us, drop me an email. There'll be stuff about London on our website and about what we can do going forward.
Okay. Oh yeah, good to hear from Kath that Palace Road have managed to reduce the amount of mowing on that large estate on the South Circular. So very good work there with the residents working well with Pinnacle.
Yeah.
It is now 6:34 and I promised that we would not go over an hour. I think there's been some amazing things raised by everybody here tonight. Thank you. Lots of things for us all to think about. Can I just have a plug? If you're not a member of IEL and you live in Lambeth, please join us and help us to make Lambeth an even better place to live. Last call for if anybody on the panel wants to say anything. No? All good?
Just
Blooming Lambeth Awards.
Yeah.
The Blooming Lambeth Awards.
Oh yes, thank you.
Yeah,
We are running those Blooming Lambeth Awards again. All information on our website.
Yep.
Nominate today and there are cash prizes. Thank you so much everybody for joining us. And see you at our next food story, which we're hoping will be in late September.
Jenny, sorry. People were asking about if they can get a recording. Is the recording will be on the website? Yep.
It'll be on our YouTube channel. So when you go to the website, you'll get a link to the YouTube channel. So it'll all be there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.